Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. Now for today's video, I wanted to talk about an unmade Jurassic Park sequel that definitely would have altered the trajectory of the entire franchise in some pretty massive ways. What we're going to be going over in this video is pretty extensive and something that I've actually wanted to talk about for a very long time, but finally I can get around to doing it. Today, we're going to be going over everything you need to know about David Koepp and Steven Spielberg's very first outline for the first sequel to Jurassic Park. And by the way, these outline pages come directly from the Facebook page Jurassic Time, which happens to be a place where a lot of rare and unique Jurassic Park material can be found from the first and second films. A link to both the page and YouTube channel will of course be provided down in the description below. Now, before I go any further, I want to make it abundantly clear that this was not going to be a movie that's similar to what we got, at all. The story that we will be going over today was actually the very first adaptation of Michael Crichton's sequel book, The Lost World, into a Hollywood script from David Koepp and Steven Spielberg. But as many of you know, the Lost World movie that we actually got in 1997 is wildly different from the Lost World book that was released in 1995. This story would be David Koepp's first translation of the source material. However, even back then, there was a lot of stuff that was drastically altered in the script. As such, there is no Santiago ending, no group of hunters at all, no Roland Timbo, no Peter Ludlow, and no little girl getting attacked by compies. To put it simply, the outline story that we're going to be going over today is about as similar to the Lost World movie as that movie is to the book that it's based on. In other words, yeah, it's totally different. So first things first, let's talk about some dinosaurs. Now, back when this movie was getting made, believe it or not, a popular fan website known as Dan's Lost World page was actually leaking a ton of rumors about the production of the second film to the public, and believe it or not, a few of them actually did happen to be true. Some of the dinosaurs that they had gotten wind of appearing in the film, like Dilophosaurus or Pteranodon, would of course get cut or downsized, but the mention of a, quote, camouflaging dinosaur actually was something that was outlined and planned to appear in this movie. Now, interestingly, in the script outline, it's never explicitly made clear what kind of dinosaur this is, but rumor has it at the time that the Carnotaurus, which had the camouflage ability in Michael Crichton's book, would actually have gotten swapped out for an Allosaurus in the movie, which I do find to be a pretty cool idea that I honestly wish they went with. Another thing that Dan's Lost World page got right about the second film early on would have been the inclusion of a human character by the name of Judson. And how they got a hold of that info, I have absolutely no idea, but originally, this was actually going to be the main antagonist of the movie, who, get this, was not affiliated with InGen at all, and was actually a mercenary sent by Biosyn, which, in case any of you didn't know, this is the rival genetics company that Dodson was working under in the original Jurassic Park. These are the guys that paid Nedry to smuggle away dinosaur embryos, and in this story, they went back to finish the job. Now, for some reason at the time of production for the film, fans were under the impression that Jerry O'Connell would have been in talks to play this character. While not in the final release, this actor did manage to show up in another 1997 movie called Scream 2. So yeah, when I heard that, it actually kind of surprised me that the fans had heard rumors of him appearing in JP2 way back when. Now for the actual story. So what I'm going to do now is run through the entire outline that David Koepp wrote up for this version of The Lost World and give you a synopsis of what Steven Spielberg and company were planning back in the day for the second movie. This is all stuff that's coming around circa 1995 and possibly way before even New Year's of '96. So without further ado, this was the first official outline for JP2. The film would open on Isla Nublar, where several carcasses of dinosaurs would be set on fire by InGen. Part of the visitor center is in the process of burning down, and while this is all happening, an airplane sputters about overhead. It's actually shutting down mid-air as it's now out of gas. And as the pilot loses control of his aircraft, it crashes onto a nearby island, Isla Sorna. Meanwhile, in New York, a dying John Hammond tells Ian Malcolm about Site B. Agents of Biosyn, but not Lewis Dodson, begin to trail Malcolm, and even watch him outside of Hammond's apartment. They suspect that there's another place to get embryos or even eggs of dinosaurs. Later on, Ian Malcolm gets help from Kelly and Arby, his university students, in locating Site B. This leads Malcolm to charter a boat with Arby, Kelly, Eddie Carr, and Dr. Thorne all joining in on the trek to the island. The adults go out and explore several abandoned facilities on Isla Sorna, like the worker village and the lab. The kids stay behind in the trailers, but actually manage to save the adults after noticing an approaching tyrannosaur on the trailer monitors and notifying everyone of the danger headed their way. Meanwhile, Dr. Sarah Harding hooks up with the bad guys, led by Biosyn operative Jetson, who later throws her overboard in an attempt to kill her. But of course, just like the book, she survives. Jetson then leads the other Biosyn operatives on an egg hunt. They want, quote, good mother eggs for the company. Malcolm, Thorne, and Eddie soon find Richard Levine, who was in the aircraft that we saw earlier. But when they get to the crash site, the airplane pilot they find dead, and their vehicle short circuits on the way back. Chaos is beginning to start. This is where Jetson and his men disturb the T.rex nest and attempt to steal eggs. 2 of his men die, but Jetson gets away, only to be knocked unconscious and alone soon after. Ian Malcolm and Eddie Carr ride motorcycles over to this disturbance that they had heard earlier and run into Sarah Harding, who Dr. Malcolm has to save from some triceratops. Eddie Carr decides to bring an injured baby T-Rex back to their RV, while everyone else files into the high-hide for safety. At nightfall, the Rex parents come looking for their infant and pretty much push the trailers over the cliff, just like what happens in the final movie. Only this time, instead of Eddie Carr getting killed, it's Dr. Thorne instead. While hiding in the air, velociraptors begin to attack the high-hide. Eddie falls out and gets killed, and Arby falls too, but gets dragged away while he's stuck in a predator cage. Sarah and Malcolm use a motorcycle to get back to the hide, and then go after one of the velociraptors who has the key to Arby's cage stuck to it. After saving Arby, the group is chased away by 12 raptors before going back to the lab. While inside of this building, they manage to see some camouflaging dinosaurs stalking about the place at night. At dawn, Jetson is attacked and apparently killed by compies, while the remaining group in the lab is attacked by raptors. They use a special paralyzing gas to get away, and after this, what's left of the team makes their way to the river, where they try to sneak past the 2 T-Rexes who are now sleeping. They find a boat and quickly head out of the area, but while they try to escape, the tyrannosaurs wake up and begin to follow them down the river, one in the water and the other one running on the shore. After their chase, Malcolm, Sarah, Levine, Kelly, and Arby then go over a waterfall and escape by getting poured out into the open ocean, ending their trip to the Lost World and keeping them away from the dinosaurs indefinitely. So I told you that was different. Now, what I find to be really interesting about this entire outline for the second Jurassic Park movie is that it basically overhauls everything that ended up happening in the second film, and it incorporates some of the stuff that we've heard is going to play out in the 6th movie, which is yet to even be released, Jurassic World Dominion. Now, the reason I say this would have changed everything is because had this movie come out in the 90s, this just would have altered the entire trajectory of the further sequels that would have come out in years to come. Starting from the Lost World movie, InGen was, from there going forward, elevated from just a neutral genetics company to being the, quote, villains of the Jurassic franchise. They weren't like that in the first film. We see this transition with characters like Peter Ludlow in the second movie. We see this with Vic Hoskins in Jurassic World, and of course, Dr. Wu is still creating clones in Fallen Kingdom. Now, in the actual timeline of the film universe, Biosyn wouldn't show back up until Dodson's return in the 6th movie, which hasn't even come out yet. But way back then in the 90s, Koepp and Spielberg were actually thinking about using this rival company way sooner than what eventually wound up happening. Of course, it's also obvious that we would have gotten a camouflaging dinosaur about 20 years before the release of Jurassic World, and we also would never have seen any dinosaur in the city action back in 1997. All in all, the decision to use Biosyn instead of InGen as the antagonists and the subsequent events that play out in the script would have changed how things went forward quite a bit for this franchise. There's no telling what JP3 or really anything would have looked like after this at all had they gone with this story. Basically, this was a very close adaptation of Michael Crichton's book, and that means that it is obviously radically different from what went down in Steven Spielberg's sequel. Some elements of this early Lost World outline actually happen to include ideas that were also taken from the first novel, such as Alan Grant's river raft chase while he's trying to get the kids to safety away from the T-Rex. Only this time, they put both Rexes from the Lost World in that scene for added impact. Over time, the Lost World scripts would radically change, and the character of Jetson would eventually turn into Dr. Judson, who was then envisioned as the Gatherer's personal paleontologist, opposite to Dr. Robert Burke, who was in league with the Hunters from InGen. Originally, this guy was supposed to have a lot of scientific dialogue, sparring with his counterpart on dinosaur behaviors, and he was actually supposed to die during that whole raptor attack on the worker village that is still in the final film. But for some reason, all of his lines were given to Sarah Harding instead, once they chose to make that character both an animal behaviorist and a paleontologist in the film. Now, when it comes to the bridge in between this old script outline and the several rewrites David Koepp would do later on, I want to talk about that in more detail soon, but that will be for an entirely different video because, well, they're entirely different stories, to tell you the truth. Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler were also rumored to be showing up in the second film, but this information would soon come out as false closer to the movie's release, with Laura Dern even telling audiences that she was, quote, a little sad not to be back for this one. I know that they did plan on having at least one scene where Alan Grant would be drinking alone at a bar, clearly affected on a PTSD level from what had happened in the first Jurassic Park, and he would basically try to convince Malcolm not to go back to any dinosaur-infested island ever again. But this was all altered as things changed down the line. Anyways, guys, what do all of you think about this early version of the second movie? How do you think audiences would have received it, and how would this have changed the Jurassic Park franchise if they'd made this instead of the 1997 version of The Lost World? Keep in mind that at the time of release, the second Jurassic Park film caught a lot of flack from critics and audiences on not only being so different from the book, but also for some of its writing and how logic worked in the movie and its plot holes and etc, etc. I definitely think this version would probably have been better received on that end, but I still think the lack of Alan and Ellie was a bigger issue on a character level for a trilogy for fans and audiences of the first movie than what a lot of people probably think it was or even want to admit. But hey, I still love The Lost World Jurassic Park. It's my favorite out of the whole franchise, even though I recognize its flaws. This version is kind of like the Resident Evil 1.5 of the old school Jurassic series. But anyways, I've gone on long enough. Whatever your own thoughts and opinions happen to be on this, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. Now, before I go, I want to thank all of my game wardens, as well as all of my InGen executives. I'd also like to thank all of my park workers and InGen hunters as well. Robert Feltham and Tiago Fernandez Alves de Cruz. Guys, it seriously means the world to me that you continue to support what I do, and I never want you to ever forget that. Now, I'd like to thank all of you for watching this video, and hope you all enjoyed the content. If you feel like I deserve it, I'd appreciate the like and hope that you'll consider subscribing if you're interested in hearing from me again. I'll see you all in the next video, guys, and as always, take it easy.